So good morning, everyone. How to empower your learning solutions. This is a webinar delivered by Nebosh and myself, Ian Cooke. I'm the head of corporate and consumer services here, and that means I get to work with some fascinating businesses on talking to them about their needs and talking to them about their training and learning needs. So let me make a start. So I wanted to sort of set the scene really, and many of you know this, the learning evolution really. We've seen changes in technology over the years have really given lots of opportunities for different methods of learning to take place and given learners the ability to access their learning in different ways. So, and technology really has sort of advanced quite quickly. The hardware now allows us to really make the most of the software. Many years ago when I was first getting into computers and IT, the hardware struggled with technical or high-end advanced software programs, but that's not the case. Most of us have good computing power. Most of us have good computing power in our pocket in the form of an advanced phone. So technology really has given us the platform now and the software to deliver great learning. So if we look at the history of it, I suppose, learning from knowledge, from text and materials has always been around. Humans have learnt in many different formats, even from writing, I suppose, on cave walls and communicating in different formats, even carving on stones and sticks. We've advanced from that knowledge, that text, that content, but the way we consume it, the method of communication has started to evolve. As I've just described, some of those advances in technology now allow us to communicate in multiple different formats, but also really quickly. The speed of communication has also gone up in the sense that content can be quickly shared with millions, if not billions of people instantaneously. And you only have to look on YouTube for how quickly they can rank up video views to know how quickly content can be shared. But the person that receives it is pretty much stayed the same. And if you take that concept that the human's still the same, then advances in technology still have to deliver the same output and still have to design that content in a way that meets a human's expectation. It can be easily understood. It should be informative. The message might need to be simple and explained simply. The technology behind it can be really complicated, but the human remains the same. And so therefore, you've gone from a book to huge amounts of data storage in server centers. So we can now store large amounts of content, technical content, and in health and safety we know there is a lot of content out there. We can have this available in our central learner management system or cloud-based system, and then the way we access that can be in multiple ways. And obviously we're all starting to learn now on the go or in the flow of work, as that term is often used. But as I say, we've remained the same. So there are some things that have evolved rapidly. Humans pretty much still as we are. So if we take that concept that we're still pretty much in need of learning, and it's now quicker and easier to access and can be much quicker to consume, what we really want to do is make sure we know what people need. And obviously people now have the ability to choose what content they need very easily. They can search and refine their need using search engines. Lots of training companies have large libraries of content, as we've just talked about there, and they're repurposing that content in many different ways to engage with different audiences. So I think identifying that need for me when it comes to empowering your learning is still one of the most important things. It's really important to know that before you start to spend time creating content and looking at delivery methods, you spend time really analyzing what is the need you're trying to solve. And if you know there's a market out there with a lot of need, then you've hopefully got a successful or a commercial product potentially. In corporates, it may not be about commercial products. In terms of in-company training, it might be a need that you need to improve safety performance or a knowledge of a particular task. It might be a new task. But either way, what I'm finding from talking to corporates is that identifying that need is the challenge. And I think it's because, as it says here, it's time consuming and it often requires in-depth analysis. So it means actually people have to spend that little bit longer analyzing their need in real detail And therefore, sometimes they may skip that step. They think, okay, well, we know we needed some training on manual handling, for example, but we may not be prepared to actually drill down into exactly what part of aspect of manual handling we need. Is it a repetitive task, or is it particularly the twisting of the motion of the person moving it, or is it the load itself? What aspect? It may be 2 or 3 factors, but just picking a off-the-shelf program or finding content online that's unique to your need is sometimes hard. So analyzing your need is key, and it can take time, but it will pay benefits if you do put that time in. So I wanted to ask, we've got some polls and questions and different ways of interacting. So I'd like to ask everyone who's online today if you could use some of the options you have available. So during this presentation or the webinar today, you can use the Q&A box to ask any questions and answers, and we'll try and pick those up at the end. We also have a couple of polls that we're going to insert throughout this presentation, and then there's the chat function as well. So here for this one in the chat box, can I ask the audience what training needs or challenges you currently have around health and safety? You know, for example, fire checks not carried out, or it could be any aspect of occupational health, safety or environment really. But what are your current challenges in your businesses? Or if you're a consultant or a training company, what are your sort of common themes you're hearing businesses are faced with? What are their challenges they're faced with? And that might give us some context later for today. So while people put that in, I will move on to the next one and I'll review in a moment. So we talked about this need and identifying the need, and maybe these are the questions you use in your business or with your customers. And I'll be interested to hear, as I say, what needs you have. But we possibly already have a lot of data that can help us with this need. So do you have accident data or inspection reports that are telling you about this? Are you implementing new factories? Are you growing the business? Are you creating new divisions? Are you working in new areas of new technology? So new processes, therefore you might need new skills. They could be brand new skills. There's often a skill shortage we hear. So do you have to take that burden on as an employer to try and find those skills? In health and safety, it's a more difficult one. It's been, you know, some of the core principles of safety have been around for some time now, and it's only new technologies that bring those challenges, but often the principles are still pretty good. So I'd be keen to hear what people think about how many new skills in health and safety are often required. But certainly in a context of a workplace, there'll be new processes, new skills there that will impact upon safety. Is there feedback from employees or other stakeholders about what gaps there are potentially in the business? We all probably know areas of the business that might be struggling or finding certain aspects of their work challenging. So training will be a way of upskilling them. That feedback might come from the employees themselves or external people with an observation of the business. Or do we take out learning needs analysis surveys and questionnaires to find out what skills we've got, the gaps, and planning for future skills? Either way, you can see these do take a little bit of time, a little bit of thought, and that might be why, from my experience, many businesses are not taking the time to identify their need as clearly as they can be. And often that's where I suppose consultancy training companies come in to help solve that. So let's have a look at, I'll just see if there's any comments there. Protected time for training, yeah, actually putting time aside. Fleet safety management, do you know, I'm gonna, yeah, that's a point. Many of the companies I've worked with in the past often have a logistics side to their business or workplace transport, and it seems to be a common challenge. I know the HSE focused on workplace transport just a few years ago and still is an issue. Workplace transport, fleet safety, it could also be things connected with workplace transport, like moving goods, lifting, loading, unloading items onto those, whether it's trucks, flatbeds, strappings that I often see, and maybe it's my limited experience in these areas, but often finger injuries, hand injuries, where they're trying to ratchet straps onto goods. So I think fleet safety, workplace transport is definitely one. Fire training, not enough adequate fire training. I think that's quite a subject which is being debated publicly at the moment, isn't it? And there will be some changes coming to the laws on that. Roles and responsibilities, good one. Okay, some of the softer side, roles and responsibilities of people. So I think we'll try and take some of this. If we get some data here, we'll share this with you after the webinar today, and we'll analyze those. But accreditation of trainings, that's a good one. So the need is to accredit their training. Is that's an interesting need in a way, isn't it? Because that's I suppose a compliance aspect to it, maybe, or an assurance aspect to their training. Okay, we'll pick out some of those and maybe respond to you accordingly after this particular webinar. Can I ask of the audience then we have today, how many of you do spend time identifying your learning needs? And if we run this poll, it'd be interesting to see how many of you do. And I'll just put it into context as well as you answer here. These are different to learning outcomes. Your learning need drives the learning outcomes. So I'd expect you all to write learning outcomes. They should be linked to what the need was. The learning outcomes solve the need. So the need is one step just before your learning outcomes. And we've got 100% people. Oh, it says 100% of people answered, but actually I know there's some more people in the room, so that's slightly misleading. But I think it's saying the majority are doing this, which is really good. I think our audience possibly today are going to be at the forefront of this and very good at doing this. But research tells us from a lot of L&D, CIPD, L&D professionals, and from other data sources that this is a challenge for businesses. So it may be that this group here today are pretty good at this because it's quite a high percentage. It's 88% yes at the moment, 12% no. Okay, and I think we had 77% of the respondents there in the end. Okay, thank you. So moving on. We have another question here. So of those that said yes, you know, you are doing this, how many of those programs that you identify need? Now, according to data, I'm going to see if you compare to the data. I have a stat that compares to this one. So how much of your training is linked to a clearly defined learning need? So when you're saying, yes, we do this and we do identify need, how many of your training programs do you apply this to? Because we know some training is just off the shelf, kind of generic, which is fine. There is a place for that. That's good. Okay, so it's coming through. Again, it's the higher percentages. There's probably, at the moment, as people complete, we've got about 60% have completed. Most people are in the 60 to 80% bracket here, which is really encouraging to see, actually. Well, I can tell you some of the data we've seen, it's only just over about 20% that actually do this, according to some L&D surveys that have been produced. I think, let's have a look. Yeah, okay, we've got most people completed there. We'll share this. It is 39% of you are saying that 60 to 80% of your internal training is linked to a learning need. So that's pretty encouraging. 24% up in the 80 to 100. So you're almost 2/3 of people are above 60%, which is good for this group. Actually, you're showing that you're quite an advanced group of L&D stroke health and safety training professionals. That's good. Okay, so moving on. The Nebosh endorsed approach is trying to recognize this. We launched a service this year to recognize these types of programs. So where you can show that you've got a clearly defined learning goal or need, you know, that solves the problem in those organizations. What we then do is check that the content is aligned to delivering that. And this is about how you empower your training, because once you have your goal, everything else becomes really easy. If you know what problem you're trying to solve, you can suddenly find it solves itself by thinking, okay, well, it's a practical challenge we have. People need a practical skill. In safety, it might be a bit of theory and then applying it to a situation, but there's a practical element. So then, therefore, the way we deliver the content will be a combination of online, potentially, or in the classroom, coupled with a practical application to demonstrate the skill. And there may be, therefore, 2 assessments that go with that, one that checks knowledge, one that checks application. And then that's the learning impact measure. Both of those can then be measured and hopefully followed up after the training back into the workplace to see they've had an impact. So quite a simple methodology, and that helps protect obviously our brand, Nebosh's brand, and obviously helps ensure that you get, either whether you're a training company selling this service or whether you're a corporate, you get what you want. So that learning need is the bit we've seen a lot of companies fail on. That's why I've just spent a bit of time with you on that learning need and identifying that. And as I mentioned as well, once you've got your need, you develop your learning outcomes, and then you go into how you deliver your content. There may be other ways of doing this, and I'd be interested to hear if people go the other way around. Some people reverse engineer things. So there's different ways, but to keep it simple, we've gone 1, 2, 3. And obviously that's a different brand there, Nebosh endorsed. It's not a qualification. It is owned by the corporates. It is owned by training companies, this type of program. So your internal training is always the clients. So moving on. Another poll question here. So if we've got our need, and then let's say you kind of design some of your content and you've got your program, your learning program developed, how many of you then measure learning impact on those internal company training programs? Let's see. Because this stat you may have heard me say quoted. This is one that I'm often quoting because it's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about this. It's 86% from the 2020 survey of CIPD reported they are not doing this. So okay, this is a bit more interesting then. So people are identifying the need, which is good, but then we've only got this is data that a bit more representative of the surveys that I've seen covered. So we're 50-50 at the minute. Let's run it a bit longer. We've got 60% of people who've responded. Is it going to end up 50-50? So it has. It's ended up 50-50 at the moment. 50% of you say yes, 50% of you say no. Again, that's still higher than what the industry is telling us out there in the marketplace. So again, this says to me you're quite a mature bunch of L&D professionals, safety professionals, and know your training, which is good. But it's still lower. So we've spent all that time identifying the need, and then we're not necessarily measuring the performance improvement we're getting back to solve that need. So that says to me, if we put a lot of work in to identify the need, we know that bit's the hard part, we're potentially missing out on demonstrating how hard we've worked in solving it to show off to our colleagues and show to the business why we've run this training program, which is really important. It would be like not celebrating success, wouldn't it? And we know that's an important part of training. Okay, thank you for that. Again, that has stayed at 50-50, so that's interesting. So with your courses then that measure learning impact, do you report on the results? So this is only going to be a small percentage of the group now that can probably answer this, unless someone wants to put none, obviously. But for those 50% of you that said we do, how many of you share those results and really follow back up with learners at a later date to celebrate what they've done? You know, let's think about this then. You've spent time identifying the need, you've designed a great training course, you've measured the performance improvement. Now the key bit is going back to them, isn't it? And we know this in a communication system of giving the feedback to workers to say, hey, you've been on a course, you've done well, look at the result, hey, brilliant, well done. That's really how you get engaged. Okay, wow. So yes, all with 14%. Yes, most 34. So it's about 50% of you are saying yes, most or above. And then some of, yeah, there's only 10% of you saying none. And about 45% saying some. So the majority of you are saying some. If you, it is actually total now is 56% saying yes, some, and a smaller percentage saying none. Oh, there we go. It's changing slightly. So it is heavily weighted to 3 and 4 here. We'll again share these results, guys, afterwards. But again, that shows us that we're doing the hard work at the front, but not necessarily the. And I appreciate there is some harder work here still, but this is the rewarding piece of celebrating the results, unless they're not showing what you want, of course. Okay, thank you. So effective learning content then, after establishing that goal, that need, we can focus on the content as we've just talked about. And sorry, there we go. My mouse is playing up. I think my battery might be going. What you really want to try and achieve with your content is to have it as flexible and engaging as possible. So what we mean by that is if we've got this simple message, a simple need, and let's pick an example of, say, first responders to incidents. We know that staff need to act quickly when they may come across an incident, and they need those few seconds could be vital. So the kind of messaging you're going to give your workforce on first responders is possibly really, really important for them to remember. A simple analogy: it's a bit like staying alive music for CPR. It's something simple that people can remember, and in the heat of the moment will hopefully respond to and act on. So how do you get content that's flexible and delivered to all your workforce that need to be a first responder? There could be tens of thousands of workers, could be hundreds, or certainly a majority of the workforce. 80% of your frontline workers may need to be first responders to incidents potentially, and know what to do. So the content should be maybe delivered on mobile phones. It could be done through a classroom method where we're getting large numbers through quickly in 20-minute sessions. That's maybe the length of the content. But what we need to have is some form of engaging, whether it's music, remembering a song, or some form of getting those to remember the content. So it's really important we look at that goal, incident response, and then align it to the method that works well for our workforce. And if we can get it accessed anytime, because we know workers you could have a 24-hour shift operation, you could have workers that work at weekends or in different countries. So it may need to be translated. We may need to check that it makes sense in those other languages, and the images are correct and powerful and mean the right things to those people in other areas, but available on multiple devices and available anywhere. Ensure that content measures the learning and then gives that feedback. So if it is digital and if you're not in a classroom, it's really important that we ask the questions. A bit like what we're trying to do a bit today with these polls, is get some feedback from people on the training. So it's really important your system does do that, and it checks understanding of the learner, that they're engaged in that particular piece of content. And back to your learning need, if it is to be an efficient responder and say contact your command and control center in your business, initiate the response procedures. It could be a first aid incident, it could be a fire incident, it could be an IT security breach. Many large businesses will have the same process for not just safety but security, and including IT. So raising that call with a known person, it might just be one number, a simple number to remember. It could be an email, it could be a call point, but that first call point to engage the response team, who may be the trained person to come and deal with the incident, they need to know that they're getting that right. They need to have during the training a method of feedback that says, yes, you made the right decision, you contacted the right, or you followed the right process. And it's important to recreate that situation if you can. And it gives them that ability to self-develop and explore, to check what they've learned does work and practice that themselves, which is the important bit, because you want them to do it when they're not in a training situation and they're back at work. So that continued, that effective learning continued. Chunked content, this is something I think is really important in terms of learning design. If you may establish you've got one learning need, but from that need there may become 2 or 3 separate components. So if we take a first responder, for example, the first thing might be to make sure they're safe. As we all know, it's really important the first responder ensures their own safety and don't become another victim. If it's a high voltage environment, that could be the floor is actually charged and they need to know how to maybe move safely on a charged floor, which I've seen training done on this. It's really, really interesting. If you're not familiar with it, it's something that the training can be quite unique for those types of hazards. If you work in a chlorine an environment where chlorine gas could be leaked, the different methods that you would approach to a fire, for example, often the opposite. Go in a building and open windows upstairs potentially. So there are different methods for these different hazards, and what you've got to try and do is say, okay, how do we chunk all this into simple learning? So the first one would be, how do we identify the potential hazard we could be facing? Second one, how do we then make sure we're safe? Third one may be then to report the incident through our chosen method. And there could be a fourth one as well, where you might ask them to capture data, take a photo, stay around, support the injured person. If they're first aid trained, there could be another sequence of training that kicks in. Either way, you've got these little chunks of information. And by doing so, you then can also adapt the way that's delivered to suit that particular chunked content. And for those that know how memory work, your memory works in chunking information into that. For many people, that's an easy way to assign new information. You chunk it to previously known knowledge. So that learning design does help retain information then into that chunking. I'll come on to how you can evolve that chunking in a moment, but oh, my animations are gone a bit skew here. Maybe I should have learned how to do my own training. So reinforced messaging, once we have that chunk content, some bits of that chunk content will become very important for the learner to know, and they'll be I suppose your key learning outcomes in a way. Well, let's reinforce those bits. Let's not get lost in detail or try and repeat training which is going to sidetrack us away from what we want the learners to know. So we don't want to spend too much time, say, for an incident responder knowing how to maybe deal with extinguishers if it's not fire extinguisher training. That's a separate training course, or first aid, for example, separate. So an incident first responder may not have those skills or a requirement for that training. So let's not blur lines. Let's just leave it there. Let's not try and get them to identify the different types of fire extinguishers and so on and so on, but reinforce the key messages that we do want them to know. And so like marketing, it should be consistent, catchy, and potentially use reminders, particularly in a corporate setting where you've got large numbers of workers that potentially are going to go back to their jobs quite quickly. And you might just need a little poster to remind them of a catchy phrase of, oh, incident responders. Yeah, I remember that, a little acronym or something. And the learning impacts that we've spoken about should have positive or negative consequence. So we do want to test that the learners at the end of this training have learned what they should have learned. So for incident responders, we might want to practice these scenarios and give feedback with some reinforcements, positive, those that do well and we should celebrate, and maybe those where we're having challenges. It's not necessarily negative in the sense we discipline them, but it could be a consequence of some sort that maybe they have to be checked again, maybe they have to go into the training again, or some consequence to try and reinforce the positive behavior. And I think some last tips on this from experience and from research is make it real. So learning is often more effective when linked to the workplace or real life. So if you've spent the time, you've got your need, you've chunked the information into different bits, can we find a common story, a thread between all of it? And it's a bit like the incident responder. Start from how it would begin. Start from an incident occurs, maybe choose 2 or 3 different scenarios, and then practice that response and how people deal with that, and take them through to the feedback loop all the way through to the lessons learned, and maybe explain to them how important that incident responder is. They may not be involved in the investigations later on, but if they're dealing with it effectively in the first place, that allows the business to carry out appropriate investigations quickly, capture data, capture witness statements, and that first responder is key to that. The output that the business gets back is therefore a positive reinforcement. So link it to a story, potentially use a case study if you have one in the workplace, create short scenarios based on those chunking areas, and sort of link it together to make it real. And often with this, you can use emotional type story arcs. So it's a bit like the superhero that starts off all powerful, then obviously gets into trouble, has a challenge, but then overcomes that because they're human and amazing. And then they achieve greatness. They solve the problem. Their incident response was so well effectively managed that no other workers were hurt, and the injured person was taken to hospital quickly and made a full recovery. And there's the happy ending. Not always, we know, but the happy ending, hopefully, even in some negative situations, is that we have learned and we've changed. And that's so create stories around whatever the training is. It helps people learn, and the images used are proven to help aid memory and recall compared to, say, the spoken word or the written word. So humans have a much better affinity for remembering images such as people's faces or pictures versus, say, names and written or spoken word. So it will help workers remember those things. So this one, your comments, please. It'd be great to hear what learning impact or performance measures you use. So if anyone has any examples of performance measures they use for their internal trainers. This is not necessarily tests or quizzes. We know those. It's more of those ideas around how have you checked that your training you've delivered either internally or as a consultant training company, how have you gone back to those companies and checked any innovative ways or just good suggestions you're happy to share today? Please provide those in the chat box. I'll just give you a moment for those, and I'll share some ones that I have with you today in a moment. I think any of the safety professionals that are on the webinar today, or listening in later, should I say, and I should maybe say something that if you are listening later, you won't be able to. This webinar is now closed and chat comments will not be reviewed. But for those that are here today, those safety professionals, performance measures that safety professionals use are wide, far-reaching, and there are many of them. So there's lots of them out there. How can we use those to help measure the learning impact in training is the important question here. So we all know audits, inspections, safety tours, safety sampling, all these different methods that we often hear. There's multiple different variations of those. So I'll see what's coming in. So yeah, theoretical and experiment exams, learner feedback sheets from the attendees. Yeah, I think learner feedback sheets are useful. I think it's the type of questions you might ask on those. So I think ones where you may just ask them to rate the course or would you recommend this is probably not the type of learning impact I'm sort of looking at here. But ones where you might ask them for, say, confidence ratings or their understanding of certain aspects of it and how they're going to apply it, and then maybe monitor that. So if you ask them a question to make a commitment to do something differently on those feedback sheets, what are they going to do differently? And then you as a business monitor that can demonstrate there's been some impacts from the training. So I think your feedback forms, it's interesting. I know a couple of people have put that there. And pre and post assessments. Yeah, that's good, Mohammed. I think, sorry to pick you out there. Good point. If you do it pre and post, then you can often show that there's been a change, which is good. So interesting to see that one. Yeah. Okay, thank you. We'll review some of those. And again, if there's any useful information, we'll share this with those after this call. And please move on. Thank you. There we go. So here's some ones that I've probably used this slide before on a webinar, so you may have seen this one before. With peers, so people, you know, colleagues, they're often the most powerful influence on you at work. If you can set the right culture and the right sort of parameters with this, and it's a fair and valid performance measure, then using peers to evaluate each other can be quite a powerful method because it's self-regulating in many ways. So getting your colleagues to check that you're doing something correctly. How can that be done? Well, just issue these random observations. You don't know when your colleague might be assessing you, but they are going to be assessing you at some point formally, in the sense that they'll be given a task to assess you once a month or something like that, maybe, and be open to the feedback you get from that, and be respecting in the sense that you may have to observe somebody else. Managers, obviously, it's their legal requirement often to supervise and check, so it's really important they can do that. And I'm talking about these in more general terms, not specific. So what can managers do? Well, managers can obviously observe their team or their individuals against a safe system of work. And they could monitor somebody's work task against the safe system of work, potentially, you know, which should link to your risk assessment. So compliance with wearing PPE or following a process that's been written. This is what you've documented. Is it actually relevant and is it working? Managers can also, and I've seen this used in one organization, they can also move to a different department and observe colleagues in another department. So that's quite an effective way of being transparent and open. Depends where your safety culture is, and depends what type of business you're in, if you have that ability to do that. Team measures. This is a great way to not put too much pressure on individuals. Often people, as we know, workers in particular, think health and safety is something which is negative on them, or a way the employer can punish them, or they're going to get prosecuted individually, all those sorts of, we know, those sort of things. So creating it as a team and having the right measure that puts pressure on the team to perform is often much more palatable. And also you get that competitiveness between different departments. I have seen and been really proud of some of the work around gamification, where you've put scores, results into team-based approaches, and actually you're getting people replaying certain aspects of learning in health and safety. So creating that competitive element around teams can be good, or setting a milestone for teams to achieve is a great way to boost performance. Data and statistics. So some of you just mentioned the surveys and, that you might carry out pre and post, or incident accident data that you could use. We've got loads of those sorts of things. Investigation data, potentially, inspection, audit scores, surveys, all those. We've got lots, I'm sure, in your safety world or your training world. There's lots of those, and you could use assessments, straightforward or knowledge-based assessments here as well. Self-assessment, I think we've just covered that. So thank you for those that put those in there. But it's not just, as I say, it's not a scoring. How did you rate the materials 1 to 5? How did you, rate the tutor, for example? It is taking it to that sort of next, and those are good. Those are good for housekeeping of your training material, making sure it's relevant and still good. But it's taking it to that next level of how's that training going to be applied back in their jobs, and measuring that. Then it's that part. And please don't forget ever to link it back to your need, because that's why you did it in the first place. So it should be self-explanatory. And if your need was established against some metrics such as incident data, then measuring that same data again to see the improvement is a must. You're going to have to do that one at least. And then the last one here, obviously, we talked about advances in technology. There are so many different forms now, and I was talking about this morning, actually, before the webinar, about surgeons and how they will spend, I think it was 6 months, could have been 6 years, but it was it's a relatively long period of time practicing in a virtual reality world for open surgery before working on, live humans. And I think that's the key point there, live. They will practice those skills in a safe environment before then moving on to obviously working in a live theatre. And I think there's a safety example I have of this in wind turbines. I know a lot of electrical engineers that have to service wind turbines may have to know how to safely isolate the electricity prior to going out to them. So they'll do that in a virtual world where they can see the wires, their hands appear on screen, they can use clippers and wires and different types of tools to safely isolate the electrical wires. So this type of technology in the right situation, if you've got your need and it's a practical based situation, this type of technology is really powerful and can save actually a lot of money. Actually, it might appear expensive up front, but actually the cost of flying people out to, say, wind turbines in the North Sea is going to be quite expensive. So that type of training works well there. It may and will, I'm sure, evolve so that more businesses have access to this type of training. Role play and others, and there are quite a lot of different types there, which I'm always happy to talk to people about if they're interested. So that's it from the webinar today. It's a real shame I can't hear everyone. I'd love to be able to speak, but if you have questions or if there's any in the chat that I've missed or the Q&A, I would love to hear more. And then, as I say, we'll share lots of the results, but that's it. Thank you. And I would like to say, if you are interested in any of the things that we spoke about today, I know quite a lot of you are already speaking to us, but if there's anyone here today who would like to learn more, you can connect on LinkedIn. That's the QR code for my LinkedIn, or email me or contact me on any of the details there you can see on the screen. So thank you for listening. And I'll hopefully speak to you soon. Thank you.